In this video, we will be discussing about check if a parenthesis string can be valid. A parenthesis string is a non-empty string consisting only of opening and closing brackets. It is valid if any of the following conditions is true. You are given a parenthesis string s and a string logged, both of length n. Logged is a binary string consisting only of zeros and ones. If logged of I is 1, you cannot change s of I, but if logged of I is 0, you can change s of I to either opening or closing bracket. Return true if you can make s a valid parenthesis string, otherwise return false. So what they are saying is that in the input, we are given a string s and we are given another string that is logged. This string s will contain of opening and closing parenthesis, and the string logged will consist of only 0 and 1s, right? So now we need to find out whether this string s can be balanced or not, right? Now what is the role of this logged string? So what they are saying is that whenever our log is 0, right, then the corresponding character in the string s can either be an opening bracket or a closing bracket, right? It can be anything. But when it is a 1, then whatever is present here, that is going to remain the same. That cannot be changed, right? So basically, if I combine these two, so here we have a 0. So this character can be anything. It can be either a closing bracket or an opening bracket, right? Then we have 1. So this has to be closing. Here also this has to be opening. This has to be closing. So these will always remain as is, right? Then here this can be anything. This can be anything, right? So now this is our string, right? Now we need to identify whether we can balance this parenthesis string or not, right? At these question mark places, at all these placeholder values, we can either have an opening bracket or a closing bracket. Now we need to identify whether this can be balanced or not, right? So now how does a balanced parenthesis string looks like? So for a balanced parenthesis string, for each of the opening bracket, there has to be a closing bracket towards its right, right? For example, if I have this string, so this is balanced, right? For this opening bracket, we have this closing bracket. For this opening bracket, we have this closing bracket. Then if I consider this string, then this is also valid, right? For this opening, we have this closing. For this opening, we have this closing, right? So if you see over here that in a balanced parenthesis string, the number of opening brackets is always equal to the number of closing brackets, right? Basically, what I am saying is that in a balanced parenthesis string, the number of opening brackets is always equals to the number of closing brackets, right? So, can I also say that the length of my balanced string should always be even? Yes, right? Because for each opening bracket, we will have a closing bracket. So, if let us suppose I have one opening bracket, so there has to be one closing bracket, so overall length will be 2. If let us suppose the opening brackets are 2, then there should be 2 closing brackets, right? So in that case the length will be 4, right? So basically if the number of opens are odd, the number of close will also be odd, right? And when we add an odd and odd, we get an even number, right? And when the number of opens are even, then the number of close will also be even, and when we add two even numbers, then we get an even number, right? So the length has to be even, right? So these are the two things that we need to keep in mind, that in a balanced string, the number of opening brackets should always be equal to the number of closing brackets, and the length of that string has to be even, right? And the condition that an opening bracket can only be paired with a closing bracket towards its right and not towards its left, so that we will handle through our logic. So there is one base case which we can check in the starting itself, that if the length of this string is odd, right? So we can never balance this, right? So at that time we can straight away return a false, right? Otherwise, if it is even, then we will check whether this particular string can be made a balanced parenthesis string or not, right? So now, so see, there is a classic problem where we have a string and we need to identify whether this particular string is a valid string or not, right? And how do we do that? So we maintain a stack, right? We create a stack and then we start moving from left to right. Whenever we encounter an opening bracket, we put this opening bracket inside our stack, right? So first we are here, so we will put an opening bracket inside our stack. Then we'll come here. Now, whenever we encounter a closing bracket, we check that for this closing bracket, do we have a corresponding opening bracket present in our stack or not? So we see, yes, it is present. So then that means this particular opening bracket can be paired with this closing bracket, right? So this gets removed from the stack and these two are sorted now, right? But what if for this closing bracket, our stack is empty? There is no corresponding opening bracket. So then that means this string cannot be balanced, right? Now you will come here. So this is an opening bracket. It will come here. Then you will come here. This is a closing bracket. So you will try to pair it with this. So it will be removed from the stack. Then you will come here, opening. You will push to the stack. Then you will come here. So this is a closing. You will pair it with this one, right? And your string will be finished, right? Now let us suppose that here we had an opening bracket, right? Then what would you do? You would insert this opening bracket into the stack, and then you would finish your string, right? Now you would see that after traversing the entire string, your stack is not empty. Then that means there is some number of opening brackets which were not balanced with any closing bracket. So in that case, your answer would be false, right? And then the second scenario was that here you had a closing bracket and your stack would be empty in that case. So for this closing bracket, you would try to pair it with some opening bracket, but the stack is empty. So then that means there are extra closing brackets and there are no opening brackets to balance this one, right? So in that case also the answer would be false, right? So basically eventually for each of the closing bracket, I should have an opening bracket in my stack, and at the end my stack should be empty, right? Now there is one more approach of solving this without taking the stack, right? So there what we do is that we try to check whether the string is balanced or not using just a variable. So we can take a variable balance, right? And its initial value will be 0, right? Now what we were doing in the previous approach, that whenever we had an opening bracket, we were pushing it into the stack. Basically we were increasing our size by 1, and whenever we had an opening bracket, we were taking it out from our stack. So basically we were decreasing the size of our stack by 1, right? So same thing we will do with this balance variable, that whenever we have an opening bracket, we will add a +1 to our balance variable, and whenever we have closing bracket, we will add a -1 in our balance variable, right? So first you will come here, it is an opening bracket, so the balance will become 1. Then you will come here, this is a closing bracket, so we will do -1. 1 minus 1 will be 0. Then we'll come here, opening, this will become 1. Closing, this will become 0. Opening, this will become 1. Closing, this will become 0. So at the end the balance is 0. Then that means this is a valid parenthesis string, right? But what if, let us suppose that here instead of an opening bracket, we had a closing bracket, right? So in that case, what would happen? So you would be here, balance would be 0 initially. So it is an opening bracket. So it would become 1, right? Then you would come here, closing bracket. So 1 minus 1 would become 0. Then you would come here, closing bracket means you will do -1. So the balance will become -1. So whenever our balance is becoming negative, what does it tells? That there are more number of closing brackets, right? As compared to the opening brackets. So in this case, our answer is going to be straight away false, right? Because see, in a valid parenthesis string, a closing bracket will be only paired with an opening bracket towards its left, right? And we are moving from left to right. So if at any point your balance is becoming negative, so it indicates that we have extra closing brackets. We do not have any opening bracket to pair them with, right? So our answer is going to be false, right? So what did we understood? That if the balance is negative, then we have extra closing brackets, right? Then let us suppose that here we had opening bracket only, and then here also we had an opening bracket, right? In that case, what would happen? First you would come here, opening bracket, you would do a +1, closing bracket -1, opening bracket +1, opening bracket +1, opening bracket +1, closing bracket -1. Now you are done with the entire string. But after you are done with the entire string, your balance is still 2. It is not 0. So a balance greater than 0 tells us that there are extra opening brackets, right? Which we couldn't pair with any closing bracket, right? So in this particular case also, our answer is false, right? So basically, we got two conditions over here. Balance greater than 0 told us that there are extra opening brackets, right? And these are the two scenarios where our answer is false, right? Otherwise, our answer is going to be true, right? So this is how we used to find out whether a parenthesis string can be balanced or not, right? But in our particular case, we are having some placeholders, right? Which can either be an opening bracket or a closing bracket, right? So here now, how do we identify? So see, what we need to return? We need to return true if this string can be balanced, and we need to return false if it cannot be balanced, right? So what we will do is that we will try to find out all the scenarios where we cannot balance this string, right? And we will return a false. And at the end, if even after encountering all the scenarios where our answer could be false, we didn't return a false, so then that means this can be balanced. So we will return a true, right? So we will focus on the scenarios where this string cannot be balanced, right? So we saw from here that there are two cases where our string will not be balanced. First case is that we have extra number of closing brackets, and the second case is that we have extra number of opening brackets, right? The odd length of the string we would have already checked earlier, so that we are not taking care of right now, right? So opening brackets has to be equal to closing brackets, right? So if it is not, then that means either you have more number of open brackets or you have more number of closing brackets. So these are the two scenarios. So these two scenarios we will identify, right? So see, what we can do is that in our string, if I write it below, so this is how the string looks like, right? Now, what we can do is, see, we need to check whether in any case we are having extra closing brackets or extra opening brackets. Now to check that, what I can do is that at all of these placeholder values, I will consider all of them as opening bracket, right? So basically, opening will remain opening, closing will remain closing, and the placeholder values I will consider as opening, right? Now, even after doing this, right, even after considering all the placeholder values as opening brackets, if there are still extra closing brackets, then what does it mean? That there is no way that I can balance this particular string, right? Because if let us suppose that my string was something like this, right? Now here, if I consider all of these as opening brackets, still your open brackets would be 3 and closing would be 4. There is no way that I can balance this particular string, right? So what we will do is that first we will consider all these placeholder values as opening brackets, and we will check that are we still getting extra closing brackets. If we are getting, then that means we cannot balance them, right? And the other case is that I consider all the placeholder values as closing brackets, right? So in that case, I will check that if I consider all the placeholder values as a closing bracket, do I still have some opening brackets left? Do I still have extra opening brackets? If I have, then that means my answer is going to be false, right? So these two things we will check, right? In the first case, that is case 1, we will consider all the placeholder values as opening brackets and we will check for extra closing bracket. And in case 2, we will consider all the placeholder positions as a closing bracket and we will check for extra opening brackets, right? Now, for a closing bracket, we need an opening bracket towards its left always, right? I cannot pair this opening bracket with this closing bracket. No, its corresponding opening bracket has to be towards the left, right? So when I am considering all the placeholder values as open bracket, right? And I'm checking for extra closing brackets, what I will do is that I will move from left to right, right? And while moving from left to right, I will follow the same approach, right? In the previous approach, what we did was that we took a variable balance, right? We kept its initial value as 0, right? Then whenever we had an opening bracket, we did a +1. And whenever we had a closing bracket, we did a -1, right? Now in case 1, we are considering the placeholder values as opening bracket, right? So then that means whenever I have a placeholder character or I have an opening bracket, I will do a +1, and whenever I have a closing bracket, I will do a -1, right? So now we will come here. This is a placeholder character and I will do a +1 for the first case, right? So our balance will become 1, right? Now see, we are checking for extra closing brackets over here, right? In this particular case, for extra closing bracket, what was the condition? That our balance was becoming -1, right? So here also, while you are performing these operations, if in any case the balance becomes negative, basically -1, then that means there are extra closing brackets. So we will return a false from there itself, right? So here this was a placeholder value. We did a +1 over here. Then we'll come here. This is a closing bracket. So we will do a -1. So the balance will become 0. Then we'll come here, opening bracket +1, closing bracket -1, placeholder value, we'll do a +1. Here also placeholder value +1. So the balance is 2. But we are only checking for extra closing brackets, right? We are not checking for opening brackets. That we will check in case 2, right? So here we only had to check this particular condition. This condition we will check in case 2, right? So this is okay. Extra closing brackets are not there. Now we will check for case 2, right? So if I change our balance back to 0. So in this particular case, we are considering all the placeholder values as closing bracket, right? So whenever I have a placeholder value or a closing bracket, I will do a -1, and whenever I have an opening bracket, I will do a +1. Right. And since here we are checking for extra opening brackets, right? So what we will do is that instead of moving from left to right, we will move from right to left. Why? Because we are checking for opening brackets, right? For an opening bracket, its corresponding closing bracket has to be towards the right, right? So that is the reason for this particular case, we will traverse from right to left. Basically, in case 1, we moved from left to right. In case 2, we will move right to left. Right. And we are checking for extra opening brackets. And for this, what is the condition? That if in any case our balance becomes greater than 0, then that means we have extra opening brackets, right? So in this particular case, if at any point our balance becomes greater than 0, then we will return a false there itself, stating that there are extra opening brackets, right? So we will start from right to left. First, we will come here. For the placeholder value, we will do a -1. So the balance will become -1. Then we will come here again, we will do -1. So this will become -2. Then we have a closing bracket again -1. So this will become -3. Then we will come here. It is an opening bracket for which we will do a plus. So this will become -2. Then we have a closing bracket again. So this will become -3. Then this is a placeholder value. This will become -4. So basically at none of the point our balance became greater than 0, right? So in case 1 also and in case 2 also, we didn't encounter the false scenario. So in this particular case, our answer is going to be true. This string can be balanced. And how this string can be balanced? So here we can add an opening bracket. So opening and closing, and then opening and closing we can keep, right? So in this case, our answer is true. Let us consider another string where our answer is going to be false. So if let us suppose that the string is something like this, right? Now in this particular case, your balance would be 0 initially. For case 1, you would consider the placeholder values as opening bracket and you would do a +1, and we will move from left to right, right? So first you would be here, you would do a +1, right? And since we are checking for extra closing brackets, if at any point the balance becomes negative, we need to return false, right? So now here we will come at this point, opening we will do a +1, closing we will do a -1, opening we will do a +1. Balance didn't become negative. Let's check for case 2 where we will move right to left, right? Here, this is an opening bracket. For opening bracket, we will do a +1. So the balance became 1. Now for this extra opening bracket, what was the condition? Greater than 0. And if you see, our balance has become greater than 0 at this point itself. So here, we are going to return a false. This string cannot be balanced because for this opening bracket, we do not have a closing bracket towards its right to pair it with. So in this case, our answer is going to be false, right? So basically, we will be doing 2 passes in our string, right? One for the case 1 from left to right, one for the case 2 from right to left. So we can say that the time complexity will be order of 2n or n, right? And we won't be taking any extra space. So our space complexity would be constant, right? So let's quickly look at the code. So first of all, we will take the size of the string in n, right? So if this n is odd, basically the length of the string is odd, then we will return a false, right? Otherwise, let's take a balance variable whose initial value will be 0. Then we will move for case 1 from left to right. So I equals to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. Inside this, we will check that if it is a placeholder value, then that means if log of I is equals to 0, right? Or S of I is an opening bracket, right? So in this case, we will increment our balance by 1, right? Otherwise, if it is a closing bracket, then we will decrement the balance by 1, right? Now, if in any case, this balance becomes less than 0, basically it becomes negative. So then that means we are having extra closing brackets. So we will return a false, right? Otherwise, we'll check for case 2. So we will initialize our balance with 0 again, and then we will move right to left. I will start from n minus 1 and it will go till greater than equals to 0, and we'll do I minus minus. Inside this, we will check that if log of I is 0 or S of I is a closing bracket. So we will decrement our balance by 1, otherwise we will increment our balance by 1. Now if in any case this balance becomes greater than 0, we will return a false, right? And at the end we can return a true. Let's run this. So the test cases are accepted. Let's try to submit this. So it got accepted. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe our channel.